and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Read Aloud Time with Miss Johnson, and we are reading a series of unfortunate events, The Bad Beginning. We are actually just 2 chapters away from finishing our very first Read Aloud, so this is really exciting. So right now what we're doing is we're getting to the kind of what we say penultimate chapter of the story, because everything's been leading to this moment right now, and we're going to see what happens next. See if your predictions came true. Let's go. Chapter 12. As Violet and Klaus Baudelaire stood, still in their nightgown and pajamas, backstage at Count Olaf's theater, they were of 2 minds, a phrase which here means they felt 2 different ways at the same time. On the one hand, they were, of course, filled with dread. From the murmur of the voices they heard on stage, the 2 Baudelaire orphans could tell that the performance of The Marvelous Marriage had begun, and it seemed too late to do anything to foil Count Olaf's plan. On the other hand, however, they were fascinated, as they had never been backstage at a theatrical production, and there was so much to see. Members of Count Olaf's theater troupe hurried this way and that, too busy to even glance at the children. 3 very short men were carrying a large flat piece of wood painted to look like a living room. The 2 white-faced women were arranging flowers in a vase that from far away it appeared to be marble, but close up looked more like cardboard. An important-looking man with warts all over his face was adjusting enormous light fixtures. As the children peeked on stage, they could see Count Olaf in his fancy suit, declaiming some lines from the play, just as though the curtains came down, controlled by a woman with a very short hair who was pulling on a long rope. Attached to a pulley, despite their fear, you could see the 2 older Baudelaires were very interested in what was going on, and they only wished that they were not involved in any way. As the curtain fell, Count Olaf stood off stage and looked at the children. "It's the end of Act 2. Why aren't the orphans in their costumes?" he hissed at the 2 white-faced women. Then, as the audience broke out into applause, his angry expression turned to one of joy as he walked back on stage. Gesturing to the short-haired man to raise the curtain, he strode to the exact center of the stage and took elaborate bows as the curtain came up. He waved and blew kisses at the audience as the curtain came down again, and then his face once again filled with anger. "Intermission was only 10 minutes, he said, "and then the children must be ready to perform. Get them into their costumes, quickly." Without a word, the 2 white-faced women grabbed Violet and Klaus by the wrist and led them into the dressing room. The room was dusty but shiny, covered in mirrors and tiny lights so the actors could see better to put on their makeup and wigs. And there were people calling out to one another and laughing as they changed their clothes. One white-faced woman yanked Violet's arms and pulled her nightgown off her head and thrust a dirty, lacy white dress at her to put on. Klaus, meanwhile, had his pajamas removed by the other white-faced woman and hurriedly stuffed into a blue sailor suit that itched and made him look like a toddler. "Isn't this exciting?" said a voice, and the children turned to see Justice Strauss, all dressed up in her judge's robes and powdered wig. She was clutching a small book. "You children look wonderful." "So do you," Klaus said. "What's that book?" "Why, those are my lines," Justice Strauss said. "Olaf told me to bring a law book and read the real wedding ceremony in order to make the play as realistic as possible. All you have to say, Violet, is 'I do,' but I have to make quite a speech. This is going to be very fun." "This is going to be so fun." "You know what would be fun," Violet said carefully, "is if you changed the lines around a little." Klaus's face lit up. "Yes, Justice Strauss, be creative. There's no reason to stick to the legal ceremony. It's not as if it's a real wedding." Justice Strauss frowned. "I don't know about that, children," she said. "I think it would be best to follow Count Olaf's instructions. After all, he's in charge." "Justice Strauss," a voice called. "Justice Strauss, please report to the makeup artist." "Oh, my word, I get to wear makeup." Justice Strauss had a dreamy expression, as if she were about to be crowned queen, instead of having to put some powders and creams smeared on her face. "Children, I must go. See you on stage, my dears." Justice Strauss ran off, leaving the children to finish changing their costumes. One of the white-faced women put a flowered headdress on Violet, who realized in horror that the dress she had changed into was a bridal gown. The other woman put on a sailor cap on Klaus, who gazed into the mirror, astonished of how ugly he looked. His eyes met those of Violet, who was looking in the mirror as well. "What can we do?" Klaus said quietly. Pretend to be sick? Maybe they call off the performance. Count Olaf would know what we were up to, Violet said glumly. Act 3 in The Marvelous Marriage by Al Funko is about to begin, a man said with clipboard shouted, Everyone, please get in your places for Act 3. The actors rushed out of the room, and the white-faced woman grabbed the children and hustled them out after them. The backstage area was in complete pandemonium, a word which here means actors and stage hands running around attending to the last-minute details. The bald man with one long nose hurried to the children, then stopped himself, looked at Violet in her wedding dress, and smirked. No funny stuff, he said to them, wagging a bony finger. Remember, when you go out there, just do exactly what you're supposed to do. Count Olaf will be holding his walkie-talkie during the entire act, and if you do even one thing wrong, he'll be giving Sunny a call up there in the tower. Yes, Klaus said bitterly. He was tired of being threatened in the same way over and over. You'd better do yourself as planned, the man had said again. I'm sure they will, said a voice suddenly, and the children turned to see Mr. Poe, dressed in very formally and accompanied by his wife. He smiled to the children and came over to shake their hands. Paul and I just wanted to say, break a leg. What? Klaus asked, alarmed. That's a theater term, Mr. Poe explained, meaning good luck on tonight's performance. I'm glad that the children have adjusted to life with their new father and are participating in family activities. Mr. Poe, Klaus said quickly, Violet and I have something to tell you. It's very important. What is it? Mr. Poe said. Yes, said Count Olaf. What is it you have to tell, Mr. Poe, children? Count Olaf had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and his shiny eyes glared at the children meaningfully. In one hand, Violet and Klaus could see he held a walkie-talkie. Just that we appreciate all you've done for us, Mr. Poe, Klaus said weakly. That's all we wanted to say. Of course, said Mr. Poe, patting him on the back. Well, Polly and I are better take our seats. Break a leg, Baudelaires. I wish we could break a leg, Klaus whispered to Violet, and Mr. Poe left. You will, soon enough, Count Olaf said, pushing the two children toward the stage. Other actors were milling about, finding their places for Act 3, and Justice Strauss was off in a corner, practicing her lines from her law book. Klaus took a look around stage, wondering if anyone there could help. The bald man with the long nose took Klaus's hand and led him to the side. You and I will stand here for the duration of the act. That means the whole thing. I know what the word duration means, Klaus said. No nonsense, the bald man said. Klaus watched his sister in her wedding gown take her place next to Count Olaf as the curtain rose. Klaus heard applause from the audience as Act 3 of The Marvelous Marriage began. It will be of no interest to you if I describe the action of this insipid. The word insipid means dull and foolish play by Al Funko, because it was a very dreadful play and of no real importance to our story. Various actors and actresses performed a very dull monologue and moved around the set, and Klaus tried to make eye contact with them and see if they would help. He soon realized that this play must have been chosen merely as an excuse for Olaf's evil plan, and not for the entertainment value, as he sensed the audience losing their interest in moving around in their seats. Klaus turned his attention to the audience to see whether any of them would notice that something was afoot, but the way that the wart-faced man had arranged the lights prevented Klaus from seeing their faces in the auditorium, and he could only make out the dim outlines of the people in the audience. Count Olaf had a great number of very long speeches, which he performed with elaborate gestures and facial expressions. No one seemed to notice that he held a walkie-talkie the entire time. Finally, Justice Strauss began speaking, and Klaus knew that she was reading directly from the legal book. Her eyes were sparkling and her face flushed as she performed on stage for the first time. Stage struck to realize that she was part of Olaf's plan. She spoke on and on about Olaf and Violet caring for each other in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, and all of those things that are said to many people who decide, for one reason or another, to get married. When she finished her speech, Justice Strauss turned to Count Olaf and asked, Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Count Olaf said, smiling. Klaus saw Violet shudder. You, Justice Strauss said, turning to Violet, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband. I do, Violet said. Klaus clenched his fist. His sister had said I do in the presence of a judge. Once she signed the official document of the wedding was legally valid, and now Klaus could see that Justice Strauss was taking the document from one of the other actors and holding it out to Violet's side. "Don't move an inch," the bald man muttered to Klaus, and Klaus thought of poor Sonny dangling at the top of the tower and stood still as he watched Violet take a quill pen from Count Olaf. Violet's eyes were wide as she looked down at the document, and her face was pale, and her left hand was trembling as she signed her name. Okay, that was chapter 12, the second to last chapter. Tune in next time for chapter 13, where we conclude the very first book of a series of Unfortunate Events, The Bad Beginning. So all we know is that Violet signed that piece of paper and said, "I do." Is she married to Count Olaf? What's going to happen next? I'm so curious. This is why I love the story. We are still at the edge of our seat, even on the second to last chapter. All right, I will see you soon for the final chapter. Bye. Thank you.